Well, it's been a while, guys, right? I think it's been like since June or something like that since I've had the chance to speak and preach and be in front of you guys. So it's always a pleasure to do that. In 1989, the world was captivated by a story of a middle aged husband and father pursuing and chasing an unfathomable, unthinkable, and utterly ridiculous dream. At the age of 36, Ray Kinsella, a novice farmer with a penchant for being a bit of a wild card, is just plugging away at life, putting in his hours on the farm when he hears from the middle of his cornfield, "If you build it, he will come." Right? In one of Kevin Costner's most memorable and impactful roles that continues to reach audiences today, we see this great epic unfold as Costner's character, Ray, is literally chasing ghosts as he embarks on building a baseball field in the middle of his cornfield while facing the very real and very certain possibility of going bankrupt. He's about to lose the farm. Everyone thinks he's losing his mind, but he has to pursue whatever it is that's calling him. And he's driven by the fear of becoming like his estranged father, someone he believed played it safe and never chased his dreams. At least that's what he thought in his own mind. But as the story unfolds, we begin to see Ray regretting the way he viewed his father. And he shares his biggest regret is how the relationship fell apart. How at the age of 14, he refused to play catch with his father because his dad really pushed him to become a baseball player. In fact, he wanted to become a professional baseball player. So he really pushed him to do that. So at the age of 14, he said, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And at the age of 17, he packed up everything and left. And for the longest time, he wanted to return home. He wanted to go back and see his father, but it was too late. You know, if you've ever seen the movie, which I'm sure most of you have, you know how the story plays out. Ray builds the field. The 1919 Chicago White Sox, also known as the Black Sox because of their scandal, led by shoeless Joe Jackson. And Ray keeps hearing that whisper, "If you build it, he will come." Later on, he hears, "Go the distance." And again, later he hears, "Ease the pain." But Ray couldn't quite figure out that last part, ease his pain. Now, this epic concludes with one of the most dramatic dialogues and scenes in sports cinematic history. After Shoeless Joe Jackson, played by the late Ray Liotta, invites James Earl Jones's character, Terrence, into the cornfield where we could only imagine that, they're getting a glimpse of heaven or maybe seeing the White Sox play. I don't know. Ray is clearly upset. Then Shoeless Joe Jackson rebukes Ray, and he says, "If you build it, he will come." And he's pointing, of course, at home plate, where there's only one player left, and that's Ray's dad. After Ray introduces his wife, Karen, and daughter, Annie, Ray is left with his father. And he says, "You catch a good game. Thank you. It's so beautiful here. For me, well, it's like a dream come true. Can I ask you something? Is this heaven?" It's Iowa. Yeah, me coming from Iowa. I love that part. That's my favorite part. Iowa? Yeah. Could have sworn it was heaven. No, I wouldn't mistake Iowa for heaven. But nevertheless. And then Ray asks, is there a heaven? Oh, yeah. It's the place dreams come true. Maybe this is heaven. John turns and says, "Well, good night, Ray." "Good night, John." John starts to walk away, but Ray calls out to him, "Hey, Dad, do you want to have a catch?" I'd like that. Whew. Powerful. One of the most beautiful scenes in any sports movie ever. If you've seen it and not cried at that part, I don't know if you're human or not. But Dwyer Brown, the actor who played Ray's father, John Kinsella, shared that this simple scene has led to dozens upon dozens, if not hundreds, of interactions he's had throughout his life, throughout the past 33 years since that film's release, where people have literally stopped him in the grocery store, out at a restaurant, at different sporting events. They've called him, they've written him letters, And they just had to share with him just how impactful and meaningful that scene was for them in restoring and helping reshape their broken relationships, whether it be with their father, daughter, or son. He just said, man, I never knew that this role would have that big of an impact. You know, this particular drama is something Jesus' audience would have been familiar with as a similar story unfolded in their presence. Now, replace Costner and Brown with Middle Eastern father and son in Iowa with Israel, and you have a storyline that shares the same roots. In today's scripture reading from Luke 15, we find Jesus sitting and spending time with sinners. And this made the Pharisees and religious elite upset. Now, before reading the text, I want to add a little bit of context to the story because I think this is really important. Leading up to Luke 15, in chapter 14, we see Jesus warning a group of followers, the sinners, tax collectors, even the Pharisees in his midst. He's talking about the cost of following Jesus, what it means to actually live like him. And in a way, he says, be careful about the type of life that you're building and pursuing because you think you might be doing it the right way, but you're like a person building a house or going to war without proper consideration or understanding of what it takes to finish the job. Now, obviously, he's talking about what it means to follow the life and teachings of Jesus, but it's also a direct warning to the Pharisees in his audience. Don't assume you've got it right. And our text today dives deeper into this. Now, bear with me. I already asked Anna to share a little bit about her remembrance of the Queen, so I didn't want her to have to read all 31 verses today. So bear with me. There's so much to this. You could follow along on the screen, or you could just listen and take this in. But it's one of the most beautiful segments of Scripture and as Jesus shares these different parables. Starting in verse 1, it says, tax collectors and other notorious sinners often came to listen to Jesus teach. This made the Pharisees and teachers of religious law complain that he was associating with such sinful people, even eating with them. So Jesus told them this story. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go search for the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he will joyfully carry it home on his shoulders. When he arrives, he will call together his friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, because I have found my lost sheep. In the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous and haven't strayed away. And then he moves along. He says, or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and sweep the entire house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she will call in her friends and neighbors and say, rejoice with me because I found my lost coin. In the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. And now, the most famous of them all. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed up all of his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have enough food to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me in on as a hired servant. So he returned home to his father, and while he was a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to his servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for the son of mine was dead, and he is now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. So the party began. Meanwhile, The older brother was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We were celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, all these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And in all that time, you never even gave me a young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet, when the son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf. And his father said to him, look, dear son, you have always stayed with me. Everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. That's the word of God for people of God. So we see Jesus spending time with sinful people. How dare he? So in the first century, one of the things that happened amongst the religious leaders was that there was a sort of grading or caste system regarding different professions. Some professions were considered unclean because of the nature of the profession. So whether it was working with animals or different materials, there were certain things that would make you unclean. And then you have your people who worked with sheep. They were dirty. They were at the bottom of that caste system. So if you were a religious leader or a Pharisee, you would never consider this kind of work. It would make you unclean. So you can't miss this subtle thing that Jesus does. He says, suppose one of you has 100 sheep. It's easy to miss what an unbelievable opener that is. Now imagine saying to the most religious person you know, hey, you know what it's like to run a strip club? So Jesus is getting after them. He's saying, he's trying to paint this broad picture about what it means to be clean and unclean, what it means to be a sinner, and all this sort of stuff. So he begins telling the story about this lost sheep. And he talks about the shepherd going out and finding it. Now, there's a celebration when he finds the sheep. He's excited. But then there's the work of carrying the sheep back on his shoulders. That was hard work. And then when he gets back, there's this massive celebration. You could say it's a work of restoration in doing the hard work of bringing it back. Then when he gets back, everyone parties. And then he talks about the same thing with the coins. Sheep, coins, and sons. Why does Luke share the story this way in this sequence? One of my favorite thinkers and Bible thinkers and teachers is Rob Bell, and he shared this thought on this particular passage, and this is what he has to say about what's lurking beneath the surface. He says, underneath these three parables is that all three things belong. Their fundamental state is belonging. And the story is about the energy of the shepherd, the woman, and the father, and the rescuing, welcoming, receiving, restoring that which is lost. The energy is not flowing from the thing that is lost. The engine of the story is the movement of the one to whom each thing belongs and returning those things to the proper place. So when Jesus talks about alternative wisdom and gospel wisdom, he shifts from telling stories and parables that relate on a much deeper level. What does the sheep do? Nothing. The story turns on the sheep's lostness. What does the coin do? Nothing. It's found. That's what it does. What does the son do? Well, the son does return home, but he returns home under the assumption that he would never be welcomed in. He says, I might as well be welcomed as a slave, as a hired servant. Never in his mind is he picturing restoration in the Father. The Father goes way beyond. The stories turn on the nothingness, the lack of action of the sheep, the coin, and the son. The engine of the story, and Jesus knows what he's doing here, is the one to whom each thing belongs is not lost. Now, why do I keep bringing this up? It's about transactionalism. Transactionalism is the belief that if you do A, then God will do B. Now, this is how too many people understand spirituality and religion. Just tell me what I need to do, and I'll do it. Or if I do this, God, can you do this in my life? And we actually end up doing that with relationships as well. But so much of our spiritual anxiety is built off of this premise. If I just pray more, if I just go to church more often, if I just join a Bible study or a small group, if I just read the Bible more, if I just give more, I'm sure many of us have been caught up in that type of thinking. And this creates so much anxiety that we constantly live with the notion or idea that we're not good enough or will never be good enough. And the answer the church has done a poor job of giving people for the longest time is you just got to try harder. Then things will get better for you. Transactionalism, it's lethal. It loads your heart down with a creepy and lethal dose of anxiety. This becomes the drive that leads people to their religious grave. And the tough part is they don't even know it. It's called the Pharisee syndrome. Now, a lot of the focus in this prodigal son story is about the younger brother, which I believe is Jesus' intent. He's baiting the Pharisees here. So Jesus makes the son in the story so untouchable, so unclean, so awful, almost irredeemable. And then the story takes an incredible turn. The story is never supposed to focus primarily on the son, but on the extent the father is willing to go to love and restore this horrible son. Jesus is essentially saying to the Pharisees, remember that parable I just taught? Yeah, you know that one about building a house and not finishing or going to war without preparing properly? That's what you're doing with your life and how you approach people and relationships. You're the older brother in the story because you're so consumed with rules and laws and regulations and being good. It's all performance-based religion and faith to you. And you're angry at the notion that some of these people who don't fit your system might be loved just as much as you, and you can't stand it. The father to the older brother says in the story, you know, you've always been with me. You've been here every step of the way. You don't realize that you're so stuck in your goodness and your religious righteousness that you never realized you were at the party the whole time. Be careful about what type of life you're building and extend and show grace, love deeply. You know, we made these stories so much more about sin and how we're a lot like the prodigal, or we have to go chase after that which is lost. And while we know the story is about redemption, one of the things the church has done well is convince us that we're always the prodigal. And we end up creating a separation that was never there and was never meant to be there. William Paul Young, and I'll have Bobby throw that slide up there. William Paul Young, he was the author of The Shack. In his book, Lies We Believe About God, he has this to say about this idea of sin and separation. We Christians have long espoused a theology of separation. A lot of my people, and here he's talking about church people, will believe that the following statement is in the Bible, but it isn't. You have sinned and you are separated from God. We think it is obviously true because we have believed it our entire lives. Once you believe this lie, the implications are devastating and the question's unanswerable. How does one get unseparated? If I do the right thing, say the right words, have enough faith, pray the right prayers, will I be transported across the great divide and made part of the special people? Later on, he says, if Jesus is actually historically God fully joining in our humanity permanently and intentionally, then Jesus is God comfortable in his own skin. He is God in the midst of our blood, sweat, tears, brokenness, and blindness. Do we really think that we're powerful enough, even in our most horrific actions and denial of our own humanity, to push God away? Do we think we can be so wretched and sinful that we become abhorrent to God? Some of us do. Some of us can't even look in the mirror because we're so ashamed of ourselves. And God is watching from a distance? No. There's no separation. And it's this particular teaching, this type of idea that there's no separation that is reinforced under Paul's words in Romans 8:38 through 39, which is the simple idea of what can separate us from the love of God. I'll give you a clue. Nothing. Don't buy into the lie that says any different. You already belong. The core of these stories is about trust. The things you are desperately searching for, you already possess. The sheep, the coin, the son cannot not belong to those whom possess it. Belonging is the natural state. Transactionalism is a fundamentally different posture to life than trust, which is an announcement of what is already true about you, which is you're already at the party. You're always with me, and everything I have is yours. Jesus literally embodies the extravagant love of the Father in this parable. Jesus is God in flesh, running to you, embracing you where you are, kissing your cheek, wiping away your tears, welcoming you home, offering you a seat at the table. Religion does a good job of building fences and walls around whatever criteria they've created to keep others out, whatever that means. Meanwhile, Jesus breaks barriers to convince us that this type of living has no place or value when it comes to kingdom ethics. So, let's bring on the robe. Let's get the ring. Let's kill the fattened calf. Let's feast. You already belong.